How would Anakin Skywalker's story change if Yoda had been the one to train the Chosen One? Anakin was extremely powerful in the Force, but he was never able to reach his potential because of the events that took place in Episode 3. However, I think Anakin's story would change quite a bit if the Grand Master of the Jedi Order was the one to train Anakin in the ways of the Jedi. Our story begins shortly after Qui-Gon's death. Obi-Wan would still defeat Maul and would be granted the rank of Jedi Knight. However, in the same conversation, Yoda would tell Obi-Wan that because of Anakin's unique situation, being older and full of attachment, and being the Chosen One, that he would take Anakin on as a Padawan instead of Obi-Wan. He explained to Obi-Wan that Anakin's situation would require a more experienced master. Yoda would train Anakin separate from many of the other Padawans. This was done so that Yoda could personally address the ways that young Anakin's fear controlled him. Yoda sensed Anakin's fear of losing his mother and even an early attachment to Padme. Yoda's expertise in Force premonitions allowed him to get ahead of Anakin's fears before they really began to manifest themselves in him. Tackling these fears early in Anakin's training rather than offering counsel to an already desperate Jedi Knight would be critical in changing the course of Anakin's story. The time between the Battle of Naboo and the attempted assassination of Padme Amidala would be a formative time for Anakin. Unlike if Obi-Wan had trained him, Anakin would spend more time in the temple, as his master rarely took on missions. He was so busy with his role as Grand Master. Anakin would watch as many of his peers came and went from the temple, accompanying their masters on adventures that Anakin could only dream about. Seeds of jealousy would be planted here. But in the meantime, Anakin would spend the majority of his training learning how to meditate and connect with the Force, something that Yoda excelled at. Yoda would teach Anakin things about the Force that no Padawans ever learned. While Anakin's peers had a long resume of exciting adventures, Anakin became so in tune with the Force that a desire for power and accomplishments began to fade from Anakin's mind. Soon he began to trust the will of the Force when it came to worrying about his mother, and thoughts of Padme soon faded. When the time came for Anakin to build his lightsaber, he would adopt a green blade to represent his connection to the Force and his master Yoda. In addition to growing incredibly powerful and wise in the Force, Anakin would become an incredible lightsaber duelist. Anakin would favor the Form 4 Ataru like his master Yoda, but he would adapt it to not only leverage acrobatics and speed, but also strong movements like the Form 5. During this time, Obi-Wan Kenobi would continue to check in on young Anakin. He wanted to honor Qui-Gon's memory and invest in Anakin when he could. But without the master and apprentice relationship and shared missions together, he would never have a deep bond with Anakin. Mace Windu even showed more grace towards Anakin, as he didn't dare go against the Padawan of the Grand Master. In the years approaching the events of Episode 2, Anakin would still begin to feel very separated from the Jedi. It would become more and more difficult for the Chosen One to connect with the rest of the Jedi, who often forgot about him despite being the apprentice to the Grand Master. The Separatist movement would continue to become a growing threat to the Republic, just as in the normal timeline. Through this, the attempted assassination of Senator Amidala would take place on the landing platforms of Coruscant. Jedi protection would be assigned to Padme, and Chancellor Palpatine would suggest Anakin Skywalker. In Attack of the Clones, when Chancellor Palpatine suggests Obi-Wan, I believe it's because he knows that that means Anakin will also be assigned to protect her as well, thus putting Anakin in a position to form an attachment to Padme, which we know will be key to Palpatine's plan with Anakin. In our story, though, Palpatine would directly suggest Anakin be assigned to protect Padme, but Mace Windu would immediately dismiss that, instead recommending Obi-Wan and his Padawan Barriss Offee. Now, side note, I think if Barriss was trained by Obi-Wan, or basically by any Jedi who wasn't as callous as Luminara, she wouldn't have turned to the dark side and framed Ahsoka. But that's maybe a video for later. Anakin would be frustrated at the choice to assign Obi-Wan and Barriss to protecting Padme. Primarily, he was frustrated because he was growing desperate for a chance to prove himself as a worthy apprentice to the Grand Master Yoda. But in part, he wanted to see Padme again. If you recall from part 1, because of Anakin's focused training on meditation and oneness with the Force, his thoughts did not dwell on Padme as strongly as in the original timeline. From here, many of the events of Episode 2 would play out as normal, only instead of Anakin traveling with Padme, it would be Barriss. This would mean that Anakin and Padme would not have a chance to fall in love with each other. Instead, Anakin would remain at the Jedi Temple, growing more and more frustrated that he was not able to take a mission for himself. During this time, Anakin would begin to have dreams of his mother dying. While Anakin had been able to detach his thoughts of his mother more effectively under Yoda's teaching, these dark side-fueled dreams would begin to rule Anakin's lonely nights. However, unable to break from his training with Yoda, Anakin would remain at the temple rather than go to Tatooine, while his mother died in a Tusken Raider camp. Anakin would be made aware of her passing much later. When he brought his worries to his master, Yoda would again dismiss them and remind Anakin that a Jedi must learn to remove any attachments. Soon, the Council would get word from Obi-Wan of his discoveries on Kamino. Barriss would transmit this signal from Naboo, and Padme would try convincing Barriss to travel to Geonosis in order to help Obi-Wan. But Barriss would deny that idea, and the two would remain on Naboo. The Senate would respond to the growing separatist movement by approving the use of a galactic army, and based on Obi-Wan's information, Yoda would travel to Kamino to investigate the clones. Only this time he would bring his apprentice Anakin Skywalker. Mace would proceed to take what Jedi he could to Geonosis. The rescue of Obi-Wan and the Battle of Geonosis would play out in a similar way to the original timeline. The Jedi would put up a valiant effort, but would ultimately be overwhelmed by battle droids. But in the final moments, Yoda and Anakin would arrive with the grand army of clones. The Jedi and clones would push the attack on the droid starships, but instead of Anakin and Obi-Wan chasing Dooku alone, the gunship occupied by Yoda, Anakin, and now Obi-Wan would spot Dooku fleeing and begin their pursuit. Arriving at the hangar, the three Jedi would corner Count Dooku, who was preparing his shuttle for takeoff. Sure of his powers as a Sith Lord, Dooku would greet his opponents with confidence. But this time, the three Jedi would face him together. And Anakin, being a bit more wise, would not rush Dooku. Instead, the three Jedi would begin to surround him. The duel began quickly, with Yoda taking Dooku head-on while Anakin and Obi-Wan flanked him. And despite Dooku's master swordsmanship, he would be outmatched and eventually subdued and captured by the Jedi. With the droid army in full retreat and Count Dooku captured, it would appear that the Clone Wars had started and ended on the same day. Unfortunately, this would not be the case. Unknown to the Jedi, Darth Sidious was still in control and would have many contingencies in place should Dooku be captured this early. 1 month has passed since the capture of Count Dooku on Geonosis, or the events of Attack of the Clones. He has maintained silence throughout his imprisonment despite the best efforts of the Jedi. But unknown to Dooku, Darth Sidious would have no plans of freeing his failed apprentice. Throughout the galaxy, the Grand Army of the Republic would sweep through the Separatist forces. But no matter how many victories they would achieve, the war would drag on beyond the couple of weeks it was supposed to take. With the capture of Count Dooku and no leader of the Separatist forces to rally behind, it would have been over shortly after the first Battle of Geonosis. But because Darth Sidious was pulling the strings of the war, it would only end on his terms. Since the Separatist forces were hardly putting up a fight, the Jedi would opt out for regular command positions in the Republic Army. This would remove the majority of them from the front lines, or put another way, this would mean Jedi did not have DC-15As trained on them Anakin Skywalker, along with his master Yoda and fellow Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi, was instrumental in bringing a quick advantage to the Republic when they captured Dooku. But Anakin was still continuing to grow, frustrated that the Jedi were not taking action. I believe that even with Yoda training him, Anakin would still have a deep-seated desire to prove himself as the most powerful Jedi. In fact, I think if Grandmaster Yoda was his master, his ego would only skyrocket. Under Yoda's tutelage, Anakin would become incredibly powerful, but the insecurities of Anakin Skywalker in the regular timeline would follow him even into this timeline. The pitiful resistance of the Separatists would lower the excitement around the war, so to speak. To the majority of the Republic, this was nothing more than a few frustrated star systems with a dwindling army of battle droids. Palpatine would need to increase the urgency of the matter if Order 66 were to succeed. He would need an apprentice to push this mission forward, an apprentice to draw the Jedi onto the front lines. Palpatine would reach out to the dark side of the Force, and following its lead, he would discover a junk planet that held a presence familiar to him. Soon he would come face to face with the creature that was once his former apprentice, Darth Maul. Sidious would take Maul back to his hideout on Coruscant, where he would use the dark side to heal the brokenness of Maul. Impressed by his ability to survive, Sidious would send him out to be an agent of chaos within the Clone Wars. Maul would quickly turn the tide of many key battles, leaving a trail of slaughtered clones, innocent civilians, and even some separatist forces from time to time. This slaughter would only begin to catch the attention of the Jedi Order. I'd like to clarify that the Jedi have not been completely removed from the war, rather, they've just taken a minimal role, serving as occasional advisors, or perhaps serving as glorified protection to occasional high-value targets or missions. But for Anakin, the Jedi were not moving fast enough to neutralize the threat of Maul. Frustrated, Anakin would visit Dooku, hoping to gain information that would be useful in finding and killing Maul. Reality would set in for Dooku once Anakin told him that Maul was wreaking havoc. Dooku would realize that he had been replaced and his master was not coming for him. Dooku would begin to talk to Anakin, relating to him as he had once been Yoda's apprentice as well. Dooku would understand Anakin's desire to prove himself. He would understand the pressure of being apprenticed to the most powerful Jedi in the Order. And Dooku would quickly manipulate Anakin into freeing him. He would say that he could lead Anakin to Maul and even his master. Anakin would believe that with Dooku's help, he could defeat Maul and his master. Anakin and Dooku, two apprentices of Yoda, would sneak out of the Jedi Temple. Dooku would take Anakin to Sidious's hideout in the abandoned industrial sector of Coruscant. Here the two would come face to face with Maul and Sidious. Anakin and Dooku would quickly move to attack the two Sith, but Maul would step in front of Sidious, challenging both opponents. The duel would be fierce, but the combination of Dooku and Anakin would outmatch Maul, and soon, by Dooku's lightsaber, both of Maul's legs would once again be removed. The victory over Maul would be short-lived, as Sidious's distinct cackle filled the room. "Good, Lord Tyrannus, good," he would exclaim. Anakin would be confused, as Dooku then turned on him. Yoda's former apprentice would attack his current apprentice in hopes of regaining the favor of Darth Sidious. However, Sidious's attention was now on a new apprentice, Anakin Skywalker. The duel between Dooku and Anakin would play out almost exactly as it did in Revenge of the Sith. Dooku would toy with Anakin, but rather than drawing on anger to defeat Dooku, Anakin would sink deep into the Force, as Yoda's training had made him very good at battle meditation, a skill where a Jedi becomes so attuned to the Force and his surroundings that he can easily read any situation as if it were in slow motion. This is the same technique that Qui-Gon used against Maul in The Phantom Menace. Anakin would gain the upper hand on Dooku and eventually disarm him. and Anakin would hold his lightsaber to Dooku's neck, vaguely aware of Sidious's cackle, and eventually his command to kill Dooku. Standing over Dooku, Anakin would look over to Sidious, who had removed his hood. The familiar face of Palpatine would be revealed. Palpatine revealed himself in hopes of manipulating Anakin as he did in the original timeline. However, because Anakin had spent more time training with Yoda in the temple, he would not view Palpatine as a father figure as he did in the original timeline. Anakin would deactivate his lightsaber and tell Sidious that killing Dooku was not the Jedi way. Frustrated that Anakin did not go down the path to the dark side, Sidious would send a bolt of lightning at Anakin. But before it could hit him, Dooku was in front of Anakin with his lightsaber ignited, blocking the lightning. Dooku would tell Anakin to run, that they were no match for Sidious, but he could hold him off long enough for Anakin to escape. Anakin would hesitate, thinking that he could help. But before he could, Dooku would use the Force to knock Anakin away. As Anakin was turning to run, Dooku would call out saying that the clones had been altered. But before he could say anything else, Palpatine would ignite his lightsaber through Dooku's heart. Anakin would narrowly escape Palpatine's hideout. But once clear, he would head straight for the Jedi Temple. Rushed into moving ahead with Order 66, Palpatine would contact clone commanders across the galaxy, telling them to execute Order 66. Palpatine would call all available clone units to Coruscant, where he would have them march on the Jedi Temple. Anakin would make it to the Jedi Temple, where Obi-Wan and his new Padawan Ahsoka Tano would inform him that the temple was on lockdown, and that all Jedi were to prepare for an attack. Because the majority of the Jedi were at the temple, it would be far more difficult for Palpatine's clones to kill them. All of the clones are attempting to fulfill Order 66, even our beloved Rex. Anyways, now remember these events are taking place just after the first battle of Geonosis, so the Republic would not have had time to pass laws that allowed for more and more clones to be added to the Grand Army of the Republic. Every corner of the Jedi Temple and outside surrounding the temple would be filled with sounds of blasters and lightsabers. Wanting to speed things up, Palpatine would arrive on the battlefield and cut through the Jedi with no effort. The clones began to rally behind Sidious. No Jedi would stand a chance. Anakin would find his master Yoda and tell him that Palpatine was behind everything and that he was the Sith Lord. Yoda and Anakin would work together through the battlefield, assisting numerous Jedi, including a surrounded Mace Windu, an injured Kit Fisto, and even a room full of younglings. The duo were so attuned with the Force that no amount of clone troopers could stop them. Soon, Yoda and Anakin would face Palpatine on the battlefield. Palpatine's speed and power would make it a challenge for Anakin and Yoda. Palpatine would also be wielding both of his crimson blades. Both blades would be a blur of red light that kept Anakin and Yoda from getting too close. Eventually, the two Jedi would begin to flank Sidious, though, and back him into the Jedi archives. The Sith Lord would begin to get desperate, making him all the more deadly. While Anakin and Yoda battled Darth Sidious, the rest of the Jedi began to rally together and drive the remaining clones out of the temple. Gaining the upper hand, the Jedi would focus on disarming the clones rather than killing them. While they did not know the details of the clone army's betrayal, they sensed that the clones were not themselves. As the battle wound down, Mace Windu would call Obi-Wan, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Plo Koon to his side. He would lead them to go and aid Yoda and Anakin in their deadly duel. Full of rage that his plan was failing, Palpatine would send an explosion of lightning toward Yoda. This would knock the Jedi Master out of the fight, leaving Anakin alone. Palpatine would again attempt to turn Anakin, but the Chosen One could not be swayed. Anakin was so connected to the living Force that all of Palpatine's speed seemed to slow down. Anakin could see his victory before him. Yoda's training had served him well. Mace and the other Jedi who had followed him arrived at the Jedi archives just in time to see Anakin disarm Palpatine and knock him to the ground. Palpatine would send one last surge of lightning toward Anakin. But Anakin would raise his lightsaber to deflect the lightning back on Palpatine. Right before his eyes, the Sith Lord began to disintegrate. It was over. The surviving Jedi would round up the remaining clones, and using the Force they would detect the inhibitor chips. They would extract the chips and free the clones of Palpatine's control. Without Palpatine to pull the strings of the war, the Separatists would surrender to the Republic and peace would exist once more. To replace Palpatine, Bail Organa of Alderaan would be elected as the new Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, and Bail would usher in an era of true peace and freedom. Having fulfilled his destiny as the Chosen One, Anakin would be honored and celebrated among the Jedi, even including Mace Windu. Yoda, who had survived his wounds, would offer Anakin a spot on the council, but Anakin would decline, saying that for all the good the Jedi did, he still felt that their methods were not the most effective when it came to following the will of the Force and saving those who needed saving. A very Qui-Gon Jinn vibe. Anakin would leave the Jedi Order and travel the galaxy as a true Jedi, following the will of the Force. Occasionally he would stop on Coruscant to see his friends Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. But several years later, he would travel to Naboo, where he would reconnect with Padme Amidala. The two would fall in love. Only it would not be forbidden, and Anakin was not consumed by fear. Eventually, Padme would give birth to twins, Luke and Leia. They would grow up to have adventures of their own, but for now, Anakin would train them to connect with the living Force, just as Yoda had trained him.